Welcome, everyone, to the Coin Bureau podcast. Last week, Mike and I started talking about the cashless society, and as happens so often, we just couldn't stop. So this week, we are revisiting that for part 2 of our episode on the decline of cash and what can we do about it.
Let's crack on.
Cash is obviously inherently low tech, and Brett Scott in his book has a lovely quote about it, which I'll read. Quote, cash, it remains a bug in the system, standing in the way of the fusion between finance and tech. You know, as I said, if you're a fintech app, cash is useless to you. So, you know, it's in their interest to try and wean us off it. And nowadays, as we discussed earlier, fintech has grown massively. Don't we? We have these payment apps, we have these challenger banks, you know, the things like the Monzo and Starling that only exist online. They have no physical presence whatsoever. And then we have all these other forms of digital payment. And, you know, we have that here in the West, if you like. We have the likes of PayPal, which is massive, hundreds of millions of users. Paytm in India. There's Apple Pay, there's Google Pay, there's all these sorts of things. However, much more scary are the likes of Alipay and WeChat Pay, which are Chinese. And I think between them account for, you know, almost all of the Chinese population. You either use one.
You're going to be some remote farmer.
Yeah.
Who is or a Uyghur.
Yeah, in which case you've got much
bigger
worse
problems
about how you pay for things. Yeah, and of course, we've as we discussed earlier, we've got this idea of things like Klarna now springing up, this buy now, pay later shtick that they.
I saw that for a brunch.
Really?
Yeah.
So I don't want to pay for brunch now.
Yeah.
I want to pay later.
Which is just to me is almost as bad as kind of the Wonga, like these payday loan companies, these extortionate easy money, which is, you know, directed at people who don't have money, may need some cash quickly, legal loan sharking.
Yeah, it's the absolute opposite. You know, your little boy, when he gets older, you'll be wanting to tell him about money and all this sort of stuff. It's the absolute opposite of what you tell him, isn't it? It's like, don't ever pay for anything up front. Yeah, get it on credit, get it on tick. You know,
to a degree, yeah.
Well, yeah.
But if you are financially responsible and you're able to, get it on tick, get it on credit on a 0% interest. You know.
Yeah.
You know, if you can spread your, but if it's at 84% interest or something crazy like that.
Yeah.
And if you are paying for brunch in installments, cook at home.
Yeah, for goodness. Yeah, if you're having to pay for brunch, if you're having to defer the paying for a meal, chances are you need to take a long, hard look.
But I think it's also, you know, it's an entertainment thing. You know, these tickets are 40, 50 quid, but it's still. I'm not telling people how to spend their money.
Yeah. No, of course, not financial advice. Glad I could shoehorn that in there. Also, you could consider the platforms like Uber and Amazon.
Yeah.
You know, they have cashlessness at their very core. At no point do they want anything.
The amount you spend on Amazon without even thinking about it, because it's not real money, it's just button, tap.
Buy now,
yeah,
boom.
Cool.
Yeah.
And sometimes things are not as cheap as you think they are on Amazon, because there is a rush in people wanting to buy X whatever, or you know, you go online, you search for 5 minutes and you found it 100 quid cheaper, or 20 quid cheaper, or whatever.
Yeah. It's
but the convenience means you just buy it anyway.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah. It's not real money. So all of these massively powerful entities, because you know these are some of the biggest companies in the world that we're talking about here. Huge reach, you know, global kind of reach. They want to get rid of cash because it is not compatible with their business models. They will not make so much money if they interact with cash.
You will own nothing, and you will like it and be happy. Was that it?
Yeah. So let's talk. We touched earlier on the question of demographics. You know, the question of what sorts of people use cash. What sorts of people are impacted most by the onset of cashlessness? So let's just talk a little bit about that, because cash use is certainly more prevalent among certain groups, and older people are the obvious example. Now, that isn't to say that every single person above a certain age will only deal in will only deal in cash. Of course not. But older people, they tend to stick to what they know and trust. You read these stories of older people just struggling with, modern life in general. It's so confusing. The internet and mobile phones and all this sort of stuff is really, really confusing. But there were some really kind of heartbreaking stories that I read about when, during the pandemic of the people being unable to spend their cash, of not knowing, how do I make an online payment? How do I pay online? I don't know. I'm not familiar. I don't know how I can't even turn this thing on.
Yeah.
And, that forces them out of the system. And the obvious response is, well, everyone can learn. And it's like, no, they shouldn't have to. This cash is legal tender. They should be able to use it. Allowances should be made for them. Now, the other group of people affected are generally poorer people as well. They are statistically much more likely to use cash, and there are a lot of reasons around this. It might just be distrust of the system in general. Lots of people feel very marginal, especially those from ethnic minority backgrounds, often feel marginalised by society. They don't trust authority. They don't trust the police. The government in general, as much as as much as middle class white people like us might. They might have sort of reasons for anti-authoritarian reasons or mistrust of authority to keep to kind of transact outside the system, if you like. There are these budgeting concerns that we talked about, and that are now playing a role in the kind of resurgence of cash here in the UK. As we've touched on, if you're spending physical cash, it's
kind of like when we were students and stuff like that. It was like you'd have to go to the bank to see how much money you had left, because it wasn't an app on the phone, and it was scary.
Yeah.
and you'd go and it'd be like, and that's the kind of, like, you don't need to do that when you've got it in your wallet. You can open it up and it's a little less, it's more of a regular check on my financial state.
It's a reality check, isn't it? You're like, oh, well, maybe I'll have one more. It's like, oh no.
The other thing is,
I'm going home.
Banks are crooks.
Yeah.
Do you remember when you'd go into your overdraft or something like that for a few pounds over what you could actually were allowed to, and then you'd be hit with a fine.
Yeah.
And when that fine comes in, and it's a 50 quid fine for going £2.75 over your £100 thing, and that's a big chunk of what you've got that week.
Yeah. And then often that would push you back into your
the thing,
overdraft.
and so another fine. And there was a big hoo-ha about it here, and they kind of made that illegal, didn't they?
Yeah.
But if you're poor, like a student or someone who's not on a regular wage or is on the gig economy, and you've got you want to have cash because you can't go into your overdraft and you can't have that £50 taken from you or that overdraft charge. Yeah,
there's so many reasons that to want to avoid the banking sector. And let's face it, a lot of people can't get access to banking.
The unbankable was one of the great things about crypto is it does provide banking to people who may not have a traditional fiat bank account.
That is one of the the things that so many crypto projects are trying to do, to bring sort of banking services, to bring that sort of these things we take for granted to people who just don't have them for whatever reason. But I think we've talked about this a little bit before, but I mean there are lots of people here in the UK who don't have access to banking services. I mean, I think it can be quite difficult if you're coming out of prison or something like that.
Why are you looking at
me?
If you've emigrated over here, I know that Australians used to have quite a bit of fuss trying to get a bank account over here. If you're homeless, you need a registered address.
Yeah. And you get caught in a vicious circle, don't you? It's like, well, if you don't have a fixed address, then you can't get a job. But if you can't get
job, you can't have or if you've got a job, you need a bank account so they can pay you. But if you don't have an address, you don't have a bank account, so they can't pay you. And it's
just this kind of Kafkaesque nightmare that you get sucked into. And another one that I saw was the issue of domestic violence as well. Financial control is a big weapon in the kind of in the abusers arsenal, if you like, because people, they can control the person that they're abusing's spending. And so cash is, let's say you're a woman who's being abused by her partner, her husband, say. Part of that abuse could take the form of him taking control of her bank account, seeing what she's spending and where, keeping tabs on her. So for her, cash might be the only way she has any sort of freedom. So there are huge amounts, and I should say, like, domestic violence just soared during COVID. And I think it's shockingly high here in the UK and elsewhere as well. And it's a kind of hidden, I think it's very much a hidden epidemic, because it doesn't sort of bust out to the surface very often. But yeah, my point being that there are so many roles, there are so many people for whom cash is a lifeline. Yeah, in a lot of cases. So, as I said before, those of us who are leading comfortable and relatively secure, financially secure middle-class lives are the kind of, we're not really all that affected by the trend towards cashlessness. I think, we tend to see the convenience of it. And for you and me, it's perhaps like, oh no, I know that this isn't going to tip me, that paying by card isn't going to tip me into my overdraft unwittingly. So I'm quite happy to just tap and go, beep, beep, boop, beep, 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 and you just ping around.
Like a kid at a festival.
Yeah, like a kid at a cashless festival. But there are poorer, vulnerable, more marginalised people who don't have that luxury, and for them, cash is vital. Now, I think before we look at where this whole idea of cashless society could be leading to, we should have one more quick break. So, I'll see you in a minute.
Cool.
Welcome back, folks, to the final part of this discussion about the cashless society. And now we're going to look at where this idea of cashless society is all leading to or could go. So, we've thought about cashless society in largely corporate terms so far. Power being handed to banks, fintech companies, payment platforms, etc., and how they are financially motivated to wean us off cash as much as possible. But it's the state that could prove to be a much bigger and more dangerous player in the future when it comes to cashlessness. And the big threat here is from what is known as central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. I've mentioned these before, I think, but we'll run back over what they are for those not quite up to speed. So CBDCs are basically digital representations of fiat currencies, created, controlled, and operated by state central banks. And basically, CBDCs are the reaction of central banks saw Bitcoin emerge and have seen the crypto industry grow and evolve, and they are not happy about it. They are scared. And central bank digital currencies are their reaction to it, because they have seen this and gone, there is some clever tech here. We need to take this bull by the horns. Because let's face it, the last thing the state wants to see, and I think this is probably fair to say of really any nation state, isn't it? That the last thing any nation state really wants to see is a monetary system outside of its control. Because
apart from El Salvador, man.
Apart from El Salvador, which is but I mean, El Salvador has embraced Bitcoin, has made Bitcoin legal tender, but it's still transacts with the US dollar. So what, and these are, the idea of a CBDC is a digital currency, issued, as the name would suggest, by the central bank of a country. And these present a system of financial oversight and control that could go way beyond what the private sector is currently capable of. And I think one of the problems with the growth of cashlessness itself, as we all become so much more familiar with just tapping and going, with not using cash, is that a central bank digital currency will be a much easier idea for us to accept, because we might barely notice it. Whereas if we were all transacting with cash and it was suddenly like, right, you all need to use this electronic money that is issued by the Bank of England, that would be a much harder sell, wouldn't it? To the average person in the street. So yeah, this would be, a central bank digital currency would work basically like this. So rather than us having an account with a commercial bank like Barclays, Halifax, Lloyds, whatever it is here
Chase,
in the UK,
or
Chase, Wells Fargo, whatever. We would all have an account with our relative central bank. So you and I, say, would have an account with the Bank of England. And
where would the politicians stash all their money, though? What
I'm sure
Cayman bank would they?
I'm sure there would still be plenty of offshore tax havens. But, it's an interesting question because everyone would be affected by this, and this is partly why I think basically most central banks around the world, or certainly a growing number, are doing a lot of research into CBDCs. As many people within the crypto industry are now saying, CBDCs are inevitable. They are coming.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and in some cases they're already here because, well, we'll look at that. We'll look at a few examples in a minute. But so our spending data would essentially be handed directly to the state if we have an account with a central bank. And it also, as you can imagine, this has potentially profound implications for commercial banks too, because the state, in theory, the state could be like, well,
we don't need to bail you out anymore. We can just bail ourselves out.
We issue the money. We'll just issue it straight to the consumer, and we don't need to collaborate.
Cut out the middleman.
Yeah, and all that data, would flood back to the central bank, and that that from the state's point of view, this would be this gives. There's a lot of benefits, aren't there? They've got more oversight, they've got more control. It also gives them a lot of way to potentially curb the increasing power of these tech companies as well. Because some of these companies, the likes of Apple and Amazon now, they're so big that if they keep growing, they're going to be more powerful than
they already
are. Yeah, Apple is richer and more powerful than quite a lot of nation states, which is just mind-bending, really. And I take you back. This book Snow Crash that I was talking about, this sci-fi novel by Neil Stephenson that gave us the term the metaverse. It's so good on that. This idea of corporations have taken over everything. And I'm rereading it at the moment, and it's just like, this is not hard to imagine. So the state itself has a vested interest in not issuing issuing its own, but the clue's in the name. It's a central bank digital currency.
Is there an argument that's saying, okay, cool, well, the central bank digital currency, at least that the governments are elected, as opposed to corporations?
Depends on your government, I suppose.
This is true.
Yeah. There's a lot of alarm. Just before we look at the big example here, which is obviously China, but obviously a lot of alarm was caused by Facebook's attempt to set up its Libra currency back in 2019. I touched on this in a previous episode, but this was a big wake up call for governments because they were like, hang on a sec, if private companies start issuing their own digital currencies, the implications for this are massive.
This isn't a gift card we're talking about here.
This is not a gift card, no. So, yeah, and Brett Scott talks a lot about, has some interesting stuff on Facebook and Libra in the Cloud Money book. It's governments are waking up to the idea of CBDCs, and obviously this is tied up with cashlessness as well. So, the nation that obviously everyone is watching in this regard is China. Now, the Chinese government is by no stretch of the imagination elected by anyone.
Well, on paper.
They'll tell you otherwise. The Chinese state is all-powerful. It's increasingly embracing digital networks for population surveillance and control. Like I say, virtually all Chinese use either WeChat Pay or Alipay or both. And it is already trialling its CBDC. And it has been for, I think, about a year now. And there are fears that this CBDC, this currency that the People's Bank of China issues directly to citizens, will eventually become an integral part of China's social credit system. And, this is just so goddamn dystopian. It's scary. This social credit system, this is a system whereby people can be punished for any number of infractions. It's not just a criminal justice system or anything like that. It's it's social control from right from the ground, right from on high. There was an interesting Business Insider article that I read about it. It was put out last year. Quote: the exact methodology, talking about China's social credit system, the exact methodology is a secret, but examples of infractions include bad driving, smoking in non-smoking zones, buying too many video games, and posting fake news online, specifically about terrorist attacks or airport security.
Those are all my favourite things to do.
Well, yeah. I thought of you, Mike, when I read this. Other potential punishable offences include spending too long playing video games, wasting money on frivolous purchases, and posting on social media.
The West is.
You hear that? That's them coming for you. Yeah, and punishments for this can include you can be banned from travelling. You can have restrictions put on your movement. Slow internet speeds, apparently.
I'm already being punished then.
Yeah, which for many of us would be a fate worse than death. Confiscation of pets. I'd like to see the state come and try and take Zola off you.
Yeah.
But, that would be that's a fight I would pay to see. Please take.
So will this speed up my internet if I?
Can we do a deal here? Take the dog.
Take the dog out of the window.
Take the dog. Speed up the internet. Yeah, and it's not hard to see how the Chinese CBDC strengthens a system like this immeasurably. And you can easily imagine the examples, can't you? It's like straight away you're fined. There's no legal process involved at all. It's like, there's Mad Mike. He's loitering. Is that 2 video games he's bought? No way. Right.
The greatest example of this is kind of like a homeowners association.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like the power hungriness of that. And it's kind of like no one wants to be involved in any of the actual nonsense that go into it. But then you get 1 or 2 people who are a bit more... they're programmed that way to sort of grab power and it's cool, right? Well, your bin is actually out, and then that's a fine, and it's just kind of like it's that on a macro scale. Because I know talking about how China is and how we are sets off alarm bells in a lot of people's heads, going, "These guys, come on, we're not going to be that far." But it's when the shift happens, it's gonna be quick.
Yeah,
relatively quick. It's going to be sort of encroaching a lot quicker than you think, and it may not be noticeable. It's going to be little changes here, little changes there, and then if you fall foul of the wrong person, your dog's going to be taken away.
It's not. It really isn't hard to imagine, though. How this sort of thing could grow and spread from as you say, like from maybe a very small. A very, very small, very, localized system, but gradually spreading nationally. So, to encompass, or should I say, to encompass more and more of your life. So, it might be that, okay, you left your bins out late. That's a fine. And then suddenly you find that you've left your bins out late 1 too many times, and that's had a knock-on effect. And that means, you're not eligible for this anymore. Yeah. It's like, what, you mean I can't get a credit card because I've committed these, infractions? What have my bins got to do with it?
Well, and the other thing is, like, you kind of see things like this in history. So you see, we were talking about this before when, high interest rates, like people sort of blaming certain sectors of society for things. Cost of living going through the roof, people being squeezed. The rich getting extremely richer. The disparity between the financial elites and the
everyone else.
Yeah. And then you've in history you've seen this before, and okay, cool. Well, people are snitching on each other, and it's a bit more okay, cool. If you don't agree with what we're saying, well, we'll sort that out. And it's just setting it up for something like that to happen. Yeah. And unless we sort of at least try
Yeah, you can. It's perfectly possible, as you say. History has shown that you can sleepwalk into these things.
That's a succinct way of saying exactly what.
Yeah, no, it's very true. It's very true, and I mean, it is tempting to think that we, here in the UK and elsewhere, are a long way from the sort of hell that China is, frankly, from everything that I've heard.
But you can look at it like, so you've got things like the Windrush generation and things like that, where people have been here for decades, and then suddenly, okay, you're not actually.
Yeah.
It happens to people.
Yeah.
Things like, it's
You're
just
right,
the computer says no, and this is something that's happened within our generation to a certain sector of people. Oh, yeah, you're welcome to come over here, blah, blah, blah. Oh, we've lost the papers, so we can't prove that you're actually over here. You have to leave. And people are being deported over that.
And the political winds have changed somewhat.
Yeah.
Now, sorry, you're on the wrong side of history.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely, it's disgraceful what happens, but it's, as you say, it's perfectly possible, even in a supposedly liberal country like Britain. The treatment of the Windrush generation is a prime example, isn't it? People who basically been in the UK for most of their lives.
Their lives in the Caribbean to come over here for
British citizens.
British citizens, and then having that citizenship revoked because
sent back to somewhere in the Caribbean. They were last in when they were 3. So I mean, I guess the point here is that this form of state control, this form of state overreach, is often a lot closer than we think, and CBDCs are a big part of this. And as I said, CBDCs are inevitable. They are coming our way. China is the big example. India is getting close to rolling out the digital rupee. Sweden is, the most cashless country out there, is trialing the e-krona. Nigeria has a digital naira. The Bahamas has the sand dollar. It's interesting name. So this form of money is coming, and the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve are both. The official line is that they are, looking into it, and you can bet your bottom digital dollar that they are.
But you can bet your sand dollar that it's going to.
Yeah, it's true. And so, we have to be prepared. The point we're making here, isn't it, is that cashlessness, losing touch with cold hard physical cash, is a big part of how this system is going to come into play, because it makes us used to the idea that our money doesn't have to physically exist and that we can just tap and go and whatever. So let's finish this off. Let's ask the question. So is cash dead? And if not, what can we do? So going back to what I was saying earlier, cash is definitely under attack. But as I learned putting this together, it's coming to be a lot harder to kill than we thought it was. And that should give us heart. But it shouldn't make us complacent, because there are powerful vested interests, corporate and political, that are trying to get
that have cash in its sights.
Yeah, it's being eroded by deliberate action by banks, by global payment networks, by the fintech industry, and by governments. Now, I should also say, to be fair, in the course of my research, I did find that there were a few governments who have a few central banks as well, who've sort of recognised actually that cutting out cash does actually pose a threat to many people in society. So, it's more, the picture is a bit more nuanced than it may first appear. But the attraction for the private sector and the state is obvious. Cash very much stands in the way of profit and power. And I think, not only we should also acknowledge that it's not only overreach by corporations and governments and things like that have eroded cash, it's also apathy on our part. And I think, Mikey, you, me especially, are guilty of that to a certain extent. We're guilty of going, much more convenient. I don't have a need. I don't see an immediate need for cash. Therefore, I just won't bother with it. I never took a sort of conscious decision to use less cash. I just started using my card more. I just don't, But we should be aware of that, because cash is something. It's democratic.
Freedom.
Yeah, it is a freedom. Having cash, having the ability to spend cash is a freedom, and it's being taken away from us, and we are at the same time, in many cases, willingly giving it up. And I think we should begin to think differently about cash. Now, I have, of course, to mention crypto as well, because crypto can give us a way to keep money out of the hands of the finance sector, away from banks. And
yes,
this
decentralized form of cash.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is the prime example.
Prime example, yeah. But we should be wary, because crypto is not quite the silver bullet to all this that we might want it to
No.
be. Because, let's face it, crypto, the banking sector, the traditional finance industry is waking up to crypto. In many cases, it's co-opting its technology. It's using blockchain technology, or it likes to say it's using blockchain technology. Actually, that sort of distributed ledger technology, which is different.
Very different.
Yeah. So,
not decentralized.
Not decentralized. No,
that's the important thing.
Yeah. Yeah, decentralization is anathema to these sorts of, to the finance sector. And remember, too, that crypto transactions are, in the main, a lot easier to track than cash. Everything's up on the blockchain. Unless you use a privacy coin like Monero, which is, a rabbit hole I won't go down today, but, that is an option for people, wanting some degree of financial privacy. Yeah, most crypto transactions are very, very easy to track if you have the right tools. And crypto tracking companies, blockchain analytics companies are getting more and more powerful. They are working much more closely with governments to do this and stuff. So the idea, and I've said this many times on this podcast and elsewhere, the idea that you can just merrily transact anonymously with crypto is not right. Is not true. So be aware of that. It's also worth touching on stablecoins as well. They are going to play a role in this in some way. Stablecoins are already kind of getting into sort of sectors where this idea of where people have less access to traditional forms of banking. Some people have sort of speculated that they might be able to fill a kind of role in keeping money away from banks and stuff like that. But remember, a lot of stablecoins, certainly the big ones, are highly centralized. And you can have access to those. You can have access to your stablecoin savings cut off at the drop of a hat. So although cryptocurrency, although the technology that it offers, it does provide some kind of pushback against banks and governments, it's not a silver bullet.
No.
And, to go back to cash, it would be a great shame if cash was lost. Many people, especially the most vulnerable in society, who, let's face it, already have enough on their plate, are going to suffer further exclusion, further hardship, and all of our freedoms will be eroded to a greater or lesser extent. And, financial privacy should be a right and not a privilege. Because, just because I don't want you or a bank or a government, just because I don't want people to see what I'm spending, that doesn't automatically mean that I'm doing anything illegal. If the assumption is that anyone, if you're not doing anything illegal, then you have nothing to hide, that is a slippery slope.
Oh, that's like saying, okay, cool. If you're not doing anything illegal, you've got nothing to hide. Show me your WhatsApp conversations.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If you're not saying anything wrong.
Yeah.
Show me what you're saying.
No.
You can say things that are wrong, but that are not illegal. You can spend things that are some morally deemed as not right, but are perfectly legal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's basically no one's business but your own. And
none.
And to say that argument, if you're not doing anything illegal, you've got nothing to hide, that is a slippery slope, and that slippery slope ends up in China.
Yeah.
That's where that slippery slope ends. So, I mean, the question I guess that everyone's left with is, how do we fight back against the rise of cashlessness? Well, really, I think the easiest thing you can do is just try and use cash more. Carry some cash along with you, and that this prompted me to go out earlier and get £20. It's not a lot. It won't cover a lot of spending.
No.
But for me, that's a start.
It's 3 minutes in a certain establishment.
Well, really 3. Which one?
It's a lot. It's how long a song lasts, isn't it?
So that's, don't give it. See cash. We should start treating cash as the freedom that it is. It's a freedom that can be easily lost, and of course there are benefits that we've talked about, aren't there? Things like budgeting and curbing impulse spending. Oh yeah, it's so easy to tap. Yeah, I'll just have that. Is that actually no? I don't need this tat. Thank you very much. And Brett Scott in this book, he has some more kind of some more developed conclusions about why how we can how cash can still play a part in our lives. I won't give it away here because it's a fantastic book, and I thoroughly recommend people read it. I know you won't.
I was actually thinking about not reading it, but going on Amazon and buying the Audible version of it.
Yeah, read it, listen to it, whatever. I think it's available on.
I'm sure it is.
As an audiobook. It's a fantastic.
I'd like to pay cash, but
go to your local bookshop and pay cash for it. It's terrific, and it goes into a lot more detail than we were able to go to today, especially about how the banking industry works and how they're pushing back against cashlessness. It's absolutely fascinating. But I think to end this episode, cash is about human to human contact. It's about peer to peer, and I think it taps into something age old. And once we lose that freedom, we won't get it back. So, folks, my message is, use cash more. Try and work some cash into your daily life a bit more, and let's try and keep this freedom.
Also, when the inevitable switch comes, put up a fight.
Absolutely. And actually, like something, one other thing that I don't think we touched enough upon really was the fact that if we all hook ourselves into this digital system, we are really, really vulnerable if something goes wrong. So if the power goes out, tomorrow and stays out for any length of time, anyone who's got a bit of cash on them is going to be at a distinct advantage. Not as much an advantage as someone who's got
power, a generator,
AK-47s, and a mobile generator, perhaps. But yeah, we are the lives we lead now. Certainly in a country like the UK, are so vulnerable. We just think, nothing will ever happen. The power will stay on. These networks will keep running. A data center won't get blown up by a stray missile or anything like that. Will look pretty silly if something like that ever does happen. And I think we should be wary of putting our hands, putting our society, our ability to transact with one another into the hands of something, we have no control over and we don't really understand, most of us. So there we are. Cashlessness, the cashless society. It was, like I say, it was really interesting for me to research this one. A lot of my preconceptions were challenged. I can't recommend Brett Scott's book highly enough. There's loads of other, there's loads of material out there about the cashless society. So, and I do encourage people to dig more into it. And I hope, folks, you found this as interesting to listen to as I did to research.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Cool. As usual, no idea what we'll talk about next week, but we'll see you then.
Bye-bye.